Hello and welcome to the Flix Forum podcast, where each episode we go back and we look at a Netflix original film in the order of release. Today we have Netflix 330th film from 2020. It's the drama titled Pieces of a Woman. It's directed by Kornel Mundruczo and stars Vanessa Kirby, Shia LaBeouf, Molly Parker, Sarah Snook, Iliza Shlesinger, Benny Safdie, Jimmie and Alan Burstyn. I'm Jesse and I am your host. Thank you for joining us for this episode. As always, if this is a Netflix original film that you haven't seen and you are keen on checking it out, give us a pause and come back a little bit later on because we will spoil this as we go. So we start the show with the Fast Flicks, where we do a quick little summary of what the film is all about. So this one is about a woman who circumnavigates the trauma from losing a child. And I guess that's probably a bit of a warning issue for this film and for this podcast. If this is an issue that might bring up some trauma yourself, then maybe this isn't the film for you or the episode for you, because we will discuss it as we go. Though we do talk about how it ended up on Netflix, so this has got a pretty good story. A lot of this I did get from Wikipedia because it had quite a lot of information and it does have a good story. So let's talk about the translations around the world to start off with, I think. So around the world, in Spanish, Chinese, Greek, Russian, and Vietnamese, it's called Fragments of a Woman. Good title too. I like that title. In Bulgarian, it's Fragments of a Woman's Life. So that makes sense too. Croatian, it's called Shards of a Woman. I think that probably is a little bit of a mistranslation, not a good title there. In Arabic, it's The Remains of a Woman. In Cantonese, it's Heartbroken Woman. In Japanese, it's called The Puzzle Called Me. I like that you have to sort of think about that title a little bit, but probably not the right title. Romanian, it's called Broken Woman, and in Turkish, it's called Parts of a Woman. So I guess the big thing is that this is based on a play. The play was created by Kornel Mundruczo and Carter Weber, and they were a couple who experienced miscarriage during pregnancy themselves. The couple, they didn't initially talk about their experience or process their grief, but Mundruczo read a scene written in Weber's notebook depicting a woman and her mother debating the loss of a child, and they felt that it needed further exploration. Weber, who had already titled the scene Pieces of a Woman, became the playwright after Mundruczo encouraged her to make a family drama from the scene. The play was originally performed in Warsaw in Poland, and the characters, or the setup for this play was that the character Maja was the senile mother, and her Norwegian husband play these two scenes. So the two scenes were the childbirth and a family dinner in the aftermath, both scenes which are evident in this film as well. There was a adaptation for Broadway World as well, where there was a scene performed in real time with real props. So it included like a working oven with food being cooked inside to sort of give that smell on stage. So it sort of felt a bit like a film and a classical sort of theatrical form too. For the birth scene, they used like multimedia, with the performance being recorded by a camera that was freely roaming around the stage and live screening on the screens in the theatre too. So that's a pretty cool thing as well. And there were other screens showing the ultrasound scans as well. So nice little sort of interactive stage show, I guess, from what I gather. The film of the adaptation of the play, The Pieces of a Woman, it was announced to be in production in October of 2019, with Mundruczo directing from a screenplay by Weber, and it's obviously based on the play and incorporates some fictionalized versions or aspects of this Hungarian trial of a midwife called Agnes Gerbe as well. Weber consulted with psychiatrists and other women who had lost babies while writing the film as well, and in developing the play for the screen, Mundruczo chose to set it in Boston in America, thinking that the city's historic Irish Catholic culture was a good translation of the conservative Polish society of the original play as well. So that's a nice little thing there too. What else can we talk about? I guess there's so much that we could mention in this play, and I guess a big part of this too is that when Weber wrote the script, they submitted it to the Hungarian National Film Fund. They didn't get any support. So then we go to Aaron Ryder, who read the script and showed it to producers Ashley Levinson and Kevin Turin, and they took it on with Sam Levinson and Martin Scorsese, among others, who became executive producers on the film. Scorsese, he was shown the film by composer Howard Shore prior to its release, and came on board after the film was complete, hoping to help the distribution. As the directors, they were unknown filmmakers, so that's a cool little thing too. Supporting actress Ellen Burstyn, who was directed by Martin Scorsese in the film Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, said that Scorsese picked up on things about the film that she never heard anyone else pick up on too, and she sort of said that he has such an appreciation of the art of filmmaking that you feel seen. So that's a nice little quote there as well. The film obviously explores themes of trauma, which An article in Forbes by Dr. Lippy Roy said that it was relevant during the release of the film during the COVID pandemic as well. And the director and Vanessa Kirby both also commented that the loss in the film could speak to people who had been bereaved by the pandemic too. And Webber spoke of the relevance of the isolation and inability to talk about feelings that Martha experiences throughout the film too. Kirby, she described the film as almost a character study on grief that explores intergenerational trauma too. If we talk about casting, the first person to be cast was Shia LaBeouf as Sean, and he was followed shortly by Vanessa Kirby, who was playing Martha, and she was also shown that script by Sam Levinson. The director Mundruczo was a fan of the Netflix show The Crown, and wanted to cast Kirby after watching her as Princess Margaret in that show. The day after Kirby read the script, she flew to Budapest and had a 2-hour meeting with Mundruczo and asked, when Kirby was asked about this, she said, she just loved the script, and she said, you just know when you know. So she was obviously on board straight away. Kirby and LaBeouf, I can never say his name properly, they were revealed as the lead roles in October of 2019, and Kirby spoke with women who had experienced baby loss themselves to prepare for a role, and she prepared extensively for that performance of labour in the opening scene, which we'll talk about too. She hadn't given birth herself and was concerned about making it real, so she watched childbirth documentaries, but she felt that these were, too edited, and she wrote to obstetricians and invited she was invited by one, Claire Mallon, to observe a real-life labour ward, including witnessing the birth, and she sort of said that, she wouldn't have been able to perform in the film without this experience. So some nice little behind-the-scenes stories there. Principal photography began on the 3rd of December 2019 in Montreal, Canada, and it lasted until January of 2020. As we've sort of said, this film is noted for this 24-minute long take labour scene at the start of the film. It's been dubbed as the scene of the year by some people and the most controversial scene of the year for 2021. The writer, Webber, did not anticipate this one-take shot, but the director, Mundruczo, planned it from the start. Though, she wanted all the details present. So Mundruczo began the scene with Martha's first pains and ended with this arrival of an ambulance because they didn't want to show exactly what was happening. And they wanted the audience to sort of leave having only seen the baby alive and create that suspense as well. The director also said that they wanted to make the actors, or have their own performances and make their own choices in the scene. As in, there were no marks to hit, and, the bad dad jokes, they were all, improvised, and the production team, they wouldn't show the cast any of the stage performances of the original stage show either, because they didn't want to influence them. They wanted it to be their own performance. Kirby, she told Empire that the cast had this map of where they needed to be, and then they would just free fall and see what happened. So it's a really cool way to make a film. There was a birthing coach, Alan McAllister, brought onto the set to assist Kirby and LaBeouf. They chose to shoot this scene with a gimbal, the cinematographers. They wanted it to be floaty and sort of add to that representation of the baby's perspective. And they sort of felt using this handheld camera would make it look, using a handheld camera would make it look too much like a documentary. So they explained that smooth gimbal movement that made the scene easier to physically watch as well, which they wanted to do to compensate for the potentially diverse subject matter too. Kirby, in that opening scene that we've sort of spoken about as well, she's portraying like these emotions of Martha's journey, and apparently after these continuous takes, she cried for about 3 minutes and was hugged by the director for 3 minutes after it as well. That scene that we spoke about, that opening scene, they filmed it 6 times over 2 days, 4 times on one day and twice the next with just one camera. It was the first scene shot for the film, and it took over 30 pages in the script. The 4th of the 6 takes was the one that was used for the film, and they said that it was less technically accurate than the takes on the second day, but they felt it was more alive, and Kirby was glad to be filming this scene in one take because, she felt intimidated, and it meant that she kept that same energy throughout. And she said that filming the scene was like performing on stage, and it was the best experience of her life, though it took a long time to come down from those emotions that she went through while making it as well. To stay in the emotional place between the scenes too, Kirby apparently listened to this playlist of songs about expectancy and birth as well. The sets. So the set within the couple's apartment was filmed in a real house. That's an interesting sort of side take. And it had these large archways that allowed for that camera movement throughout. And Kirby was encouraged to make use of that space if she wanted to, except for the bathroom. They chose that house because it had that same layout as the set that they used on the stage play as well. Before shooting, they did like one practice run on the phone, and that practice took about 38 minutes, and then they didn't do another practice, and they said, if you choreograph that whole shot, it can be really cold and calculated, and that's not what they wanted in this scene. They did use a real baby in that scene as well, with a CGI umbilical cord, and the baby was sort of held by the mother just outside the apartment and brought in for that birth camera moment too. The film, it had its world premiere at the 77th Venice International Film Festival in official competition on the 4th of September 2020, and it had its North American premiere at TIFF during the 2020 Toronto International Film Festival. On the 12th of September, Netflix acquired the distribution rights to the film at TIFF, and the director said he was happy to sell to Netflix, saying that their appreciation of independent filmmakers is comparable to the United Artists studio in the 1970s. There was a trailer released in November of 2020, and the film opened in select theaters on December 30th, 2020, before beginning a digital stream on Netflix from the 7th of Jan 2021. On its release on Netflix, it was the most watched film over its first 3 days of release and finished second overall in the debut weekend. So quite a big story there. We've sort of spoken about when and where it was released and where it was filmed. It did have 10 wins and another 63 nominations across the award season for this year. The biggest nominations being for Best Actress for Vanessa Kirby at the Academy Awards, at the BAFTAs, and at the Critics' Choice Awards too. What are the critics and audiences saying about this film? On Rotten Tomatoes, sits at 76%. That's on 240 reviews. So that is definitely fresh, and that is certified fresh. The audience are even higher. It has it at 84% on more than 1,000 ratings. IMDb, solidly high too. A 7 out of 10 on 57,000 ratings. Letterboxd, high again, 3.5 out of 5 on 127,000 ratings, actually being logged by 169,000 people. That's a lot of people. And Metacritic, the critics and audiences both have it in green on that traffic light system. So the critics, 66 out of 100 on 41 reviews, and the audience at a 6.6 out of 10, exactly the same on 116 reviews. So overall, massively positive. What are my early thoughts on this film? I didn't say this at the start of the episode, but I did watch this film when it first came out with my wife, and at this stage we did have one child, and we now have a second child who was a home birth, and I think my appreciation for this film has increased based on that personal experience too. So I'm very excited to talk about this film. Let's talk about some characters in this film. So Martha is our main character. This is her story. She's the person that is carrying the child, the one who has to deal with the loss and the expectations of everyone around her, when the focus should be on how she's feeling. She's a strong, powerful female character, and no matter how badly Sean, her partner, may have treated her, she is a person of her word still, and still will respect the promises that she makes to him throughout as well. And if we talk about Sean, I guess he's sort of set up as a horrible person right in that opening scene, sort of barking orders on the work site, always late to appointments, very authoritative. I think that, this is a guy who's struggling with who he is. He's not an intellect like his mother-in-law wants him to be. He's not loaded with cash, and he also struggles with sobriety and keeping clean, and the ability for himself to deal with grief in his own way. And I think it is hard to distance the negative press of Shia LaBeouf from this character, which makes, I guess that maybe it's good casting, because maybe that's the character that you want to dislike the most in this film, apart from Elizabeth, Martha's mother, who, you feel sorry for her. She wants to appear strong-willed and determined throughout, but she almost crosses that line of what a mother should be. And I guess part of that is that she's clearly showing signs of age and mental deterioration, and she wants to control every situation, as well as highlighting that distaste for Sean as well. The other side characters in this, I guess, we've got Anita, who's Martha's sister, and her husband, Chris, and they play a little role throughout in a couple of big scenes. Suzanne, the cousin of Martha, who picks up this case as a legal case. She's a lawyer. She has an affair with Sean. And the other person, I guess, that's on trial is Eva, the midwife, on trial for the death of the child. And I guess the creative team put enough doubt in the audience's mind about her competence during the birth at the start of the film to have that in the back of your mind. But I guess at the end of the day, she did everything she could to keep that child alive, and that's a good ending towards the end. If we talk about Mundruczo as a director, obviously Hungarian, we've talked about this, 26 directing credits. This is the English debut, so a pretty good debut in English from my taking for this one as well. Let's talk about some scenes. What are some scenes that stood out? There's quite a few for me. I think that opening take of the birth, it's stressful and it's not enjoyable, but it's going to resonate with anyone who's experienced birth. The back rubbing, the getting into the bath, the water, the big exercise balls, and the camera work is excellent throughout this scene. So I've got to highlight that. And I think the way the camera works throughout this film as well, especially through Martha's eyes, almost like at her workplace when everyone's staring at her, the kids that she sees in the shops and on the train, and her leaking breasts, you know, in the awkward situations, and the nappy under the toilet cubicle just made you feel what she was feeling. So I thought that was really well done. I think that final straw between Martha and Sean, when she gets home late, they argue, she sort of deflates that big birth ball with a cigarette, and then there's these shots of the messy house, dirty dishes, the dying plants, just that highlighting at the end of their relationship of what it was. That blow up at lunch between Martha and her mother. I mean, like those comments like, you know, Martha saying, this is my body and you're ashamed of me and I failed compared to your expectations. And then the mum's argument about, you know, wanting justice, but Martha also saying, you know, that's not her way. It's not her way. So I liked that too. I think Martha addressing the court at the end, stating that it wasn't Eva's fault. You know, that idea, how can I give this pain to someone else? Not, you know, it's not why her daughter came into the world. I thought that was really impactful, especially if we, you know, you'd think about that when she's staring into her mother's eyes too, just proving to her mum she's taking control. And I did like those closing scenes of Martha and her sister sort of rekindling with their mother, sitting around having lunch with her, looking out for her, and Martha going to that finished bridge that we see throughout the film, wearing Sean's beanie, sort of spreading the ashes of the child, because we know that Sean wanted the child to be the first person on the bridge, and keeping her promise to him of not donating that body, as well as that final scene with the girl in the apple tree. Just a really good way to close the film. Things I didn't like, there's an attempted forced sort of sex scene that was really hard to watch, and I didn't like that. And I also didn't like Sean being with the lawyer. I'm not sure what that added to the story. Don't know if we needed him to cheat as well. We already saw how bad a person he was. Not necessarily bad, but a flawed person is probably the better way of saying it. The themes, the ideas in this film, obviously trauma, like that loss of a child, the loss of a marriage, the loss of connection, and dealing with grief, and the expectations of not only those closest to you, like your mother or husband or partner, but those in the surrounding world. Like, how do you express your feelings when you want to keep them as close as possible to yourself? And depression, obviously that idea, it's seen through this apple, this symbol of an apple that Martha eats throughout this film. You know, as her mental state deteriorates, that apple becomes more and more rotten, until the end when we get this, you know, we see new life, we see a blossoming apple tree, which is really symbolic. And that idea too, time doesn't always heal wounds, and it's definitely not a helpful thing to say to people that are dealing with grief too. And you've got to take control of your life, move on and appreciate life, but do it in your own way too. What did I take away from this film? I think, you know, for some, the symbolism in this film may be, you know, too much in the face, but I thoroughly enjoyed sort of the opening of each scene, highlighting the progress of that bridge being built, that symbolic idea of the bridge, and bringing the audience closer to the completion of Martha's journey, juxtapositioned with that apple and it getting more rotten and rotten as she's getting further and further away from where she needs to be mentally. So I thought that was really good too. Questions, ponderings, ideas. I just think that opening scene, obviously, you know, there's no title credits for the first almost half an hour, and the effectiveness of filming that birth in one take, there is no editing. The audience sees what happens, so they can make their own interpretations of events rather than thinking something may have been taken out, which obviously leads up to that court case at the end. So I thought that was a really, really good way of doing it too. All right, I'm ready to wrap this up. We give the film a rating out of 5. For me, I mentioned I'd seen this film before. I went back and looked at my review. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, and I wasn't impressed with the birth scene. I think I said it wasn't really realistic, and I sort of said that the amount of pubic hair in the film was a little bit off-putting for me, but I still gave it 3 stars. So as I've sort of said, this time around, I think I connected with it a lot more, like the themes, the visual performances. I'm obviously a couple more years mature and having children, and I don't think I've done this very often, but I'm increasing my rating quite a bit. I'm giving this a 4.5 out of 5. Solid film. I thoroughly think this film is a must-watch film. We're on socials. We've got Instagram, we've got Facebook, and we have X, formerly known as Twitter. The question that I wanted to put on socials this week in relation to this film is that final scene, is the young girl in that apple tree at the end, is that Martha's daughter? I mean, it's not specifically stated that it is. We know Martha's asking that child to come inside. I think that you've got to have it in your mind that that is her child, and hopefully she's found new love, and this is her own child too. That's my taking, but let us know what yours is as well. We are back next week. We are always back next week. Next week we have a 2021 film. This is an international film. This is a Turkish comedy drama called Stuck Apart, or in Turkish, Azizler. It's directed by Durol Taylan and Yagmir Taylan, and it stars Engin Ganadin, Haluk Biliner, and Binir Kaya. So if you're interested, give it a watch. Come back next week, give us a listen, or give us a miss if you're not keen. Other than that, I hope you've enjoyed this discussion around this film. I think it's a very worthwhile film to watch. So give it a watch, and I will see you next week.